Hi everyone, welcome to another follow along painting tutorial. So today we're just going to be painting the sunset dock, and I'm going to be walking through my process of how I painted this simple piece. So we're just going to start off by masking off a small rectangular area within our sketchbook. I masked off about the same length as my sketchbook using an A3 sketchbook. You can do whatever size you like though, whatever you feel comfortable with, and then we're going to get into painting. So we're just going to start off by mixing a little bit of warm yellow and some white to make a very watered down light wash of yellow. We're just going to lightly use the edge of this flat brush to map out where we might want to put the sun in this particular painting, and then just go over it with a light wash of this whitish yellow colour, just to be a sort of light base to the sky. Then we're going to start mixing a little bit of that yellow and some red and white to make a sort of orangey pink colour, a sort of almost coral sort of tone, and start working into the top edge of the sky with some light washes to make sure that you're keeping your brush a bit wet during this process so you can blend really easily. And we're going to start over time adding in some layers of light orange and maybe more pink tones as well. So you really want the sky to be building from a sort of light yellow tone around the sun to pinky purple tones as the sky moves further upwards. I was using the reference image that's on screen now for getting the colours right for the sky on this particular image. Obviously I took a bit of creative license, but as you can see, the higher up in the sky you go, the more the pink and purple hues tend to come through, and closer to the sun tends to be a little bit more yellow orange type tones. So you're just going to keep working into the piece with these various oranges, pinks, yellows and purples, and just be sure to keep mixing and blending the colours on the page so you're getting a really nice smooth gradient transition. Just a little bit of water on the brush here just to allow that mixing to happen really nicely and smoothly. As you can see here, I keep blending continuously between the purples and pinks and so on, just making sure to keep the brush nice and damp so that you can blend really easily, because the gouache does dry quite quickly. And also, as you can see here, I've just added a little bit of a white yellow colour around the outside of the sun to create a bit of a glowing effect. So a great tip for selecting the right orange tone that we're going to be using for the sun is to get a small swatch of paper and just doing a bit of a test paint to make sure that the colour looks good with the rest of your composition. Once you've found an orange that you are happy with, you can go ahead and start working that into the blank spot that you've left for your sun earlier. Now, I always like to not make the sun look super flat, so once I've got the orange tone down, I'll then also work into it with some lighter tones of light orange, yellow type colours, and then just blend it all around. Just gives the sun a bit of a sense of a glow and makes it look a little bit less flat. After that, I just took some light washes of orange and purple and just started using that as a bit of an indicator to start blocking in some areas where the mountains and the dock are going to be within the piece. I think it's just nice to get a bit of a sense of the composition by blocking things in at this point once you finish painting in your sky, because later on it really helps to go back and make sure that you're putting things in the correct places when you're painting the sea and stuff. So I also went back into the sun a tiny bit more with just a few more darker hues of orange and some light washes, just to really make it pop a little bit more behind those mountains before I start blocking them in. And after I'm happy with that, I start then mixing the colours that I'm going to be using for the water. So again, just mixing that light yellow wash and some light pink hues and orange hues to then start blending in and sort of mirroring the colours that we've used for the sky into the water. But obviously the blend doesn't have to be quite as smooth here because you want it to look like there's some ripples in the water. So you can be a little bit more heavy-handed here and you don't have to worry about blending quite so much. if anything, it's quite nice to be building up a bit of a texture in the water so you can get a sense of the ripples reflecting the light from the sky. Again, just working backwards and forwards here with these light oranges, yellows, purples and pinks, and just really trying to get that similar mirrored colour to what's in the sky. The water is going to be a little bit reflective though, so using your edge of the flat brush, just going in with some light yellows and some white tones, you can start building in a little bit of a inference of the ripples that are going to be in the water. Once you're happy with the water, you can then start building in your mountains. So just grabbing a light purple wash and just blocking in the colour of the mountains. I like to always just block in mountains as like a dark colour and then working into them if there's any highlights that will be able to be seen in the lighting. Although in this particular type of lighting, because the sun is behind the mountains, you won't really be able to see too much detail because a lot of the light is coming from behind, which will create a bit of a silhouetting effect. Then we're just going to take a light wash of that purple that we just used and start working into the area of the water to start creating the shadowy reflection that the mountains will be casting within it. Then after you've put those reflections into the water, you can start just defining the edge of the mountain where it's kind of rolling into the water a little bit more. After that, I just mixed some slightly darker pink tones and purple tones, and I started using a small point brush to fill in areas where we're going to see some ripples in the water, just lightly painting in some ripples all around the scene to create a bit of movement in the water. And in those ripples you will see slight shadowing effects, and there'll also be highlight effects which we'll be painting in a bit later on, but you just want to create a sense of movement. Once you've created all the dark tones for this rippling effect in the water, we're then going to start mixing a light yellow, orangey, white type of colour and use that to start building in some highlights in the ripples from the light that's being reflected from the sun. There should be like a really nice light highlight, and it should just be really bouncing off the water and just creating a little bit of depth and a sense of motion within the ripples. You just want these to be really nice and delicate and just to be pattering over a small area of the water where the sun will be reflected. So as you can see now, I'm just adding a few light tones of white, yellow type colours, which I'm going to be blending out with a darker purple tone into the mountains. I'm just doing this really to add a little bit of depth and infer some of the shape, which you won't be able to see that well because of the silhouetting effect, but as you can see, once I've blended out using the darker purple that I've just mixed, it's kind of defining the shape of the mountains a little bit more and creating a bit more depth, which just makes it look a little bit more interesting. Once we've completed that, we're then just going to take that same purple that we used for the mountains and really water it down and start using it to slowly blend in some reflective dark tones in the water for where the underside of the dock is going to be reflected. I also used that dark purple without very much water to start blocking in the side edges of the dock and one of the legs that's dipping into the water. Obviously this area is not really very illuminated by the sun, so it is going to be quite a dark value. I then also started using a lighter version of that purple to start blocking in a bit of the top surface of the dock, which will be illuminated a bit more by the sun, so we'll be able to see that a little bit more clearly. Just filling in that dock now, getting the basic shape down, but we're going to be adding in some details with some highlights and some shadows shortly. Now we're going to be taking a small flat brush and using some of that dark purple to start defining the shape of the dock a little bit more and building in a little bit more detail. So obviously where the sun is facing the dock, we're going to be getting illumination, and on the sides that are not facing the dock, we're going to be seeing some shadow effects on the boards of wood. So we're just going to see some cracks from where the planks of wood are joining together in the areas where the sun is not reflecting. Mixing an even darker purple now, we're just going to be using that almost black purple to define some of the shadows on the side edge of the dock. And once again, using a darker purple with a lot of water just to create some ripple effects and highlights where the dock is entering into the water. So where you're making ripples, you really want to be using like a shadow for the underside of the ripple, and then the top side of the ripple you want to be using a highlight, so it creates that effect of movement in the water. I just went back and also added a few more small highlights in the rest of the water, and then decided to start adding some highlights to the front edges of where the panels in the dock are going to be lit up by the sun. Just really defining all of the edges and the shapes with these highlights and shadows. You're going to be seeing a lot of shadow on the back edge of these wood planks, but then on the front edge, because they're facing the sun, there's going to be a nice highlighting effect happening. And keeping to the theme, I've just decided to use that almost black purple that we used earlier to start blocking in the shape of our person who is standing on the edge of the dock, looking very excited to see the sun, bathing themselves in the sun. These brushes are really great. I actually bought a pack which is intended for using for painting miniature figures, but because it's such a teeny tiny point at the end of the brush, it's really easy to get into these minute details, particularly when doing a piece this small. So that was really, really useful. After painting in the silhouette of this person, I then used a very light wash of that same purple with quite a lot of water mixed in to block in the shadow. So because the sun is quite low relative to this person's body, the shadow is going to appear quite elongated and stretched on the dock. So just pay attention to the difference in the proportion between this person's actual height and the height of the shadow. The angle of the sun really dictates how elongated that shadow is going to be and what the angle of the shadow is, but we can go into that in a different video. I noticed that I didn't really like the shape, so this is a really great trick that I do sometimes. If I block in a silhouette or something and I don't really like the shape, you can sort of remix the colour of an area that's behind your person or object, and you can kind of cut into them a little bit. So I mixed a bit of the light yellowy colour that I've used for the highlights in the water, and I just used that to redefine the shape of this person's waist. I've decided to make it a woman, so I've also added a small bun to the top of the head, and just redefined the outside edges a little bit with some darker shadows. As a quick final touch, I just decided to go into the mountains with a little bit of texture, just using a bit of a darker purple and building in a little bit of form just to show where some crevices and shapes within that mountain might be. Of course, like I said earlier, we won't be able to see too much detail because of the silhouetting effect, but I just thought it'd be quite nice to add a little bit more form to the mountains. I also just added a tiny bit of a darker shadow to the underside of the mountains. Now that we're all finished, we're just going to wait for the paint to dry and then very gently peel the masking tape off from the piece, making sure that you're pulling in a direction away from the paint. Then we're going to be taking a ruler and a pencil and creating some straight lines bordering the piece about 10mm distance from each edge. I like to just place a dot on either side for each line to make sure that I'm lining everything up properly and it's a consistent 10mm distance across the entire line. Then I'm just going to use the back of my sketchbook because it's quite hard as a cutting board, and take a Stanley knife and just trim away those extra bits of paper that we don't need. And voila, the piece is finished. Don't forget to give it a little sign and hang it proudly in your wall. I hope that you guys found this tutorial useful and you enjoyed it. If you did, then please do be sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment in the section below. Let me know what you thought. Let me know how easy you found it, or if there's anything that you would have liked me to go over a little bit more or a little bit less. I will be releasing more tutorials like this in the future, so do be sure to subscribe to my channel if this is the kind of thing that you'd like to see more of. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next week.